Welcome everybody to this new event of OIDEL. I'm glad to have you all here to have this informal discussion among former ministers of education on what has happened this year during this COVID crisis in education. Before starting, I want to thank all the speakers for being here. I want to thank the audience, this terrific audience we have with us, and I want to thank the organizations that have made this event possible: the OIEC, the International Office of Catholic Education, Ignasi, and the European Parents Association. More than 1 year ago, all across Europe, schools closed for the first time due to the COVID. At the time, the General Director of UNESCO, Madame Azoulay, said something that personally shocked me. She said that there was no educational system ready for such a challenge. Nevertheless, education has continued, and not everything has been bad. We have observed that even if sometimes parents are neglected, they continue being one of the pillars of the educational systems. Moreover, we have observed that despite the attempts of confronting non-governmental education and governmental education, they have worked together to overcome this situation. We have observed an implementation also of the IT revolution in education without precedents. Of course, nevertheless, we also have observed important flaws of our educational system, such as the lack of access to internet for children and families in vulnerable situations. Today, we have 3 speakers that have been in the head of the education administrations in 3 European countries. We want to take advantage of their experience so they can shed some light on what has happened this year. The first speaker is Carmo Seabra. Carmo Seabra, she has served as Minister of Education of Portugal from 2004 until 2005 in the government of the Social Democrat Prime Minister Pedro Santana Lopes. Moreover, Carmen Seabra has developed her research activity in the area of microeconomic policy, in particular in economic regulation. Also, in recent years, she has centered her research work in the economics of education field. The second speaker we have is Ruth Kelly. Ruth Kelly served as member of the British Parliament representing Bolton West from 1997 until she stood down in 2010. She served many positions in the administration. She served as the Secretary of State for Transport, Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Minister for Women and Equality, Secretary of State for Education and Skills, and she has served both under Gordon Brown administration and Tony Blair. Moreover, last years, she has been Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Enterprise at St. Mary's University in Twickenham. And the third former minister that we have is Francesco Profumo. Francesco Profumo has an academic background as an engineer. He has been an Italian Minister of Education from November 2011 until April 2013 under the administration of Mario Monti. Also, he has been president of the National Research Council since 2011 and had previously served as Chancellor of the Politecnico di Torino from 2005 until 2011. Currently, he is the president of one of the oldest foundations in Europe, which is the Compagnia di San Paolo. I want to thank them personally once again their presence here and recall them that I am going to line some questions, but the aim of this event is to have a conversation. So I strongly encourage them to feel free to intervene whenever they feel and to interact with one another. Also, I invite the audience to send questions through the chat so I can also use these questions to interact with our with our good guests. So without further ado, let's start this conversation. I'm going to start with a simple question. What have been according to you, the pillars that have held educational systems working during this crisis, bearing in mind that no system was prepared, bearing in mind that no one see that coming, we somehow continue providing education. We somehow managed to make it to the end of the academic year. What have been the pillars according to you? Thank you so much.
And the community really came to help as well. So together with technology, I suppose, those are the main pillars that made the education system sort of work in that first lockdown. In the second lockdown, technology was much better, especially at secondary level. Schools had really managed to get it together to provide, you know, full-time education for nearly all children. Parents, however, were maybe a little bit discouraged by the length of the lockdown and worried about their employment situation. Maybe there were two parents working full-time or others who were trying to find work, much more difficult for parents. And some of the community involvement lapsed a little bit. So slightly different dynamics, but the technology was there with the teachers motivated to provide lessons for those children that could access it. And I'm sure we'll come back to this as a really major issue for the lockdown.
Carmo, you wanna go ahead and share your thoughts about this?
Okay, you are hearing me? Do you have sound?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
So what I think that in Portugal, the situation was not very different from the one that was described by Ruth, although at least it's particularly in the second lockdown, the period of closure of the schools was smaller in Portugal than in England. Schools closed in mid-January and reopened in the beginning of March. So the period was not in the beginning of April. So it was not as long as that. But the situation may not have been very different from that. In spite of this enthusiasm, and of course we had the problems with technology, of course, I think that deeper in Portugal, because here in Portugal we did also have difficulties with access to IT equipment, let us say, and IT help desks in schools and so forth. But the enthusiasm in the first period was probably similar to that in the United Kingdom, not as much in this second period, but results suggest that in spite of this commitment and enthusiasm by parents and probably by many teachers, in spite of this, results in fact were poor. And these experiments to measure the costs of this lockdown of schools, well, we have some estimates for the United Kingdom and for the Netherlands for the first lockdown that immediately suggest that at least 2 months were lost in the first period of lockdown, meaning that children were 6 and 7 years old children were delayed 2 months as compared with the children in previous years. In Portugal, we do not have this type of measures, but we have a survey carried out by the Ministry of Education in the beginning of March, and the results suggest that the effects were deep, were strong, meaning we can only compare with the PISA results of 2018, so meaning the comparison can only be made for 14 years old children, but the results are much worse than they were in 2018. Like, for instance, the proportion of students being able to successfully performing first quality tasks in literacy or in mathematics was around 18% in Portugal in that period. And this year, these results, although the tests are not exactly the same, but the same type of results suggest that that proportion decreased to 50% or less. So, in fact, the system reacted as well as probably it could, but still we have major losses. And these, of course, these losses are not a novelty, and probably in some countries worse than in others. But I believe that in Portugal, the results were very asymmetric. So the asymmetry in these losses was extreme between mainly the private sector and the public school system, for reasons that we will probably discuss later. As Rodrigo told me yesterday, if private schools are not able to entertain their children, their pupils, they will not be able to collect tuition fees, so they have to do something. Whereas in public schools, the situation incentives did not work properly, I believe. And so the consequences were much worse for public school students, that are about 80% of Portuguese students at these levels of learning, so until lower secondary education. Of course, what we had was still the result of parents, and in fact, the parents helped a lot. So in this survey carried out by the Ministry of Education, more than 70% of our children said that their parents have helped a lot. So that they worked daily with their parents, and that the parents even wanted to learn with them, or to teach or to learn, which means that they felt, 70% of our children felt that the help of parents was crucial for whatever they succeeded in doing. But I believe the results were not very good.
Yeah, interesting. No, like we are going to go later on the inequalities and the outcome of what has happened. But before to go on, I think what is interesting is, like, even though there is different educational traditions and some disparities between the UK and Portugal, it looks alike. And I would be interested also to have this first bite from Mr. Profumo to see, like, if the challenges from and if the pillars that have enabled educational systems to go on are in Italy have been similar in Italy as they have been in Portugal and the UK.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation first, Ignasi, and for the topic of this webinar. The situation in Italy was very, very similar to UK and Portugal, and also was not homogeneous in the whole country. We had a problem more severe in the south of Italy and something less in the north of Italy. And then we had the differences between the public school and the private school. In general, what we can see is a great reaction by single person in the school, both from the side of the teachers and from the side of the parents. They did what they could. But in the meantime, the situation changed so rapidly that it was impossible to have any kind of introduction of spatial tools and spatial equipment and spatial IT system, in the sense that in the last maybe 10 years, we did some improvement from the school point of view in terms of technology and in terms of pedagogy, but was not enough. And the result was that for our students was a very, very hard time. We need also to say that for students in the elementary school in Italy, we try to have more the possibility to go to school. And for the secondary school, most of the students, they spend home most of the time. This was a problem. But in general, what we can say that for the Italian system in this very difficult situation, anyhow, we had some kind of improvement. and in the sense that with the condition that we had, in some way we had like a jump of the school. Was possible to teach outside of the room in the school. Was possible to have some more activities among the students. Was possible to have some activities related to outside of school, in museum or in a playground or in some place that was possible just to teach. Then from this point of view, we had also different reaction by the students that during their normal school time, they had the possibility to have a more active role in the school. In comparison to that student, they were more passive from this point of view. Then the situation, as I said, was not very good. But in the meantime, I have the feeling that at the end of this process, the school will be better than in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to move on. Like I have like I see like there are a lot of common challenges and with a lot of common suffering. There is a thing here that I would like to hear from you. The educational administration, it concerns a lot of people in terms of like numbers of teachers, parents. It concerns an important part of the public budget, and also it concerns one of the most precious things in society, which are children. Bearing in mind these common features between the countries, and bearing in mind that we are all talking about an administration that the three of you have been in charge, what would you suggest to better prepare educational systems in the future? Which kinds of reforms come to your mind when you think, how can we better prepare our systems, our families, and the weakest children and family in society to better prepare in case this comes again, or in case we still have to continue with this crisis for another month? Ruth, Mrs. Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, then every school needs to have a technology and digital strategy. So we started the pandemic with very, very few schools in that position. And we need infrastructure that will support remote learning. So again, schools need to be aware of who has Wi-Fi access, who has a laptop and access to one, how pupils and their families are equipped to be able to respond to remote learning. And that needs to be just part of the everyday activity, as it were, of the school, that they need to have a properly functioning digital strategy. The second thing I think that is really important is that teachers need to be very aware of potential mental health challenges of children, because there are some children who can, not many, but some who can sit behind a computer all day, do all of their lessons, learn well, and survive from one day to the next, and will, emerge in good shape. But there are a lot of children who don't, and some who can't learn remotely very well whatsoever. So teachers being able to train to spot and support those parents and children, in fact, again, I think will be a really, really important element of sort of preparing the system for any future waves or any future pandemics.
Maria Carmo, you wanna? Sorry. You are in mute, just a second. Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay. I think that those aspects, of course, physical infrastructure connectivity and IT equipment is of course a sine qua non condition, is a necessary condition. But preparation of parents is very important, but preparation of teachers is also very important. I've been reading the OECD report, recent report, and they said that 35% of children across OECD attend schools whose headmasters believe the teachers are not prepared for long distance teaching. So they do not have the technical and pedagogical conditions to perform that function. 35% is a lot. So teachers do also need to be looked at very seriously, I think. And in Portugal, this is not the case in other countries, but in Portugal, I think that the most important issue is not physical conditions, nor technical, nor pedagogical attitudes of parents and teachers, but is related with incentives. We have a very difficult problem with incentives. So incentives of schools and teachers, so incentives for schools and teachers to perform well in these circumstances. Of course, this problem does not exist in the private sector, but in public schools, the problem is huge in Portugal, mainly because we have a combination of two characteristics that make the system work, I think, not very well. The first is that professors in Portugal, teachers, are allocated by a bureaucratic process carried out by the ministry. So schools cannot hire nor discharge professors when they do not perform well. And this, of course, creates a strong bias against good performance, of course. This is the first very serious problem that undermines the quality of the system, I believe. And the second issue is related with the freedom of choice. So accountability of schools and freedom of choice of parents. If schools do not work properly, that is not seen or acknowledged or punished in any way. So our mechanisms of voting one's feet with one's feet, those mechanisms do not work here. We have a lack of places in good schools, so parents are not able to choose their schools. And so this combination of these two factors makes incentives in the public system very misaligned, I believe, and undermine to a large extent the possibility of the system to react properly and adequately to a crisis like the one we have been facing. Of course, we have lots of people with a strong goodwill and people very enthusiastic and highly committed. So even in spite of this condition, the system goes on working, and we have been able to improve a lot in these last 2 decades in education in spite of these conditions. But these conditions, I believe, have to be faced if we want the system to be able to react, in fact, efficiently to situations like this. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Seabra. Like, Mr. Profumo, like, you want to react on, like, which, according to you, would be, according to the Italian experience, should be the first maybe structural changes or reforms that you would suggest to the educational administration to react better to future crises?
At least in Italy, there is much more concern related to schools than in the past, in the last years, in the sense that we had a quite investment in the infrastructure, in the IT system, and in general in the education system. But this was not enough in order to have one school able to react to pandemia that was so strong. But what I can say that with the Next Generation EU funds, our country proposed a a great investment in terms of IT infrastructure. We expect to have 100% of connectivity by the year 2026. And this is a point that we need to put on the table. In the meantime, also from the space point of view, there is a strong program in order to improve the quality of the schools, in the sense that good money will be invested both for renovate the school or to build up new schools. That you know, in Italy we have 64 million of square meters of schools. It's a huge number, and we cannot expect to have results in a short time. But I have the feeling that this time, through these exceptional funds coming from Next Generation Europe, and also in addition with the funds coming from what we call complementary funding by the government, we at least we open the street in order to get a better situation for the future. This is from the infrastructure and the connectivity. Another point is related to the pedagogical project of the school. For this, we are only in the beginning, in the sense that most of the school, they still have the traditional way to teach. Only some of the new school, they started to have a more active participation of the students from one side. And in the other side, we have a more and more hybrid situation, in the sense that they can use just the traditional way to teach, or they can use a computer in one side, and also the possibility to interconnect the school with different activities outside the school. In this way, we hope that in maybe in the next 5 to 6 years, we can improve also from this side point of view. The third point is related to the teachers. And this is the most critical point, in the sense that we still have around 30–35% of the teachers that they still have a problem with the new technology and with the methodology. Then I have the feeling that we have to go in parallel with infrastructure, IT, and teacher, and the new methodology for the students. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I was fascinated about what you were mentioning is like kind of changes in, I mean, there were debates that were present, but that have developed rapidly due to the crisis, such as the importance of developing technologies in the educational systems, or even the methodologies of awarding teachers, right? Like we have seen extra payments for doctors in many countries, but we haven't seen such a thing for teachers who have been providing education in these difficult situations. And here, one of the debates, like one of the questions, like it raises is the autonomy of the schools. You know, like some of you mentioned that the schools as institutions need to have methods to react more rapidly to this kind of crisis, but sometimes the schools struggle to do that, either because of the bureaucratic structures of the educational systems, or sometimes because they are afraid, or they refuse to, they are afraid of the reactions of parents, or they are afraid of just taking the initiative. How, according to your experience as ministers, would you encourage schools to take more leadership on that and to be more autonomous in order to be faster in future crises to react to this sort of challenges?
Maybe I can start, Ignasi. So in, can you hear me?
Yes, more or less.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So in England, there's a move towards for primary and secondary schools to become grouped in families of schools. And I think something that could be very, very useful is for groups or families of schools to work closely together, so that they can share expertise, they can learn from each other about best practice, and they can be much more agile at adapting and using resources from different schools as appropriate. So we would need an accountability regime that would match that emphasis on groups of schools, not just on the individual school. And I think that could be very, very helpful. The other thing that was quite chaotic last year in Britain, I'd be very interested to hear from Portugal and Italy, was the exam system. Because students who were supposed to take external exams at 16 and 18, at first the government's view was that the exams would be, the students would take the exams and an algorithm would be used to estimate what they would normally have achieved. That led to some very bizarre outcomes. So the government changed their minds to teacher assessment in the end of what they thought each pupil should receive, and they've stuck with that method for this year. But the whole exam system, which is dependent on a student coming in on certain days, set very high stake, high profile exams, which then stay with you for the rest of your life, I think needs some attention, because students are going to be very differentially affected by the virus, both because of their personal situation or because of their schooling. And I think we could do with a lot more personalization in the system and the ability to set exams when students feel ready, rather than feel, as they are in Britain at least, that they have to go and take them on a particular day, and how they do in that exam will determine their life chances forevermore. That has become increasingly inappropriate during these times of stress. And I do think there needs to be some sort of recognition of that and some reform to the exam system.
Interesting.
Mrs. Seabra.
I forgot the question. Okay.
The question was about the question was about like how can we improve autonomy of the schools? I mean, we realize that autonomy is an important pillar to rapidly react to this sort of crisis. I mean, this time was a pandemic, but we know also that we are in a rapidly changing world. So how can we encourage educational institutions to take more the lead on to react to this sort of crisis?
I think that what Ruth said is a very interesting point. As to promoting the autonomy, this has a very strong ideological content, as you know, and in Portugal that has been usually faced with suspicion. In fact, the Ministry of Education is the Ministry of Education is strongly dependent on teachers' unions. This must be said. So so schools' autonomy tends to be looked at with suspicion. Some attempts have been made over the last 2 decades in order to increase that autonomy, but in fact, I don't think that at least the political party in charge at this moment, which is a socialist party, is in fact interested or able to increase that type of autonomy. I don't see that in the near future. I think that we have other short-term responses to this decrease in quality. Apart from that, looking at each person in its individuality, as we're called upon, there are some other attempts that are being, I think, implemented in the United Kingdom precisely, and in Spain. like tutoring systems and summer schools that are being prepared, and that could seem to be able to have very strong effects in. So tutoring, when I'm talking about tutoring, I mean tutoring must last for at least 1 year. 2-week session of 1 hour or something like that. This is being prepared for Spain and for France and for the United Kingdom, and I would like very much it to be implemented in Portugal. It seems to work very well. And summer schools, like 4-week summer schools with one hour per day of schooling, with the rest of the period being completed with sports and other ludic activities. There have been many attempts like this worldwide, meaning hundreds of experiments of these types, and they seem to be very, very, very efficient. So I would put my faith more on these short-term responses, apart from, of course, the structural, guaranteeing the structural conditions, physical conditions that we have already discussed. Then in the promotion of schools' autonomy, which is something I don't believe will happen in the near future in Portugal.
Mr. Profumo, any thoughts about that?
Yes. In Italy, we have the autonomy system that is in place since 1999, in the sense that the level of autonomy of each school is both from administration point of view, from the organization point of view, and also from the pedagogical system point of view. What we don't have in terms of autonomy is the recruitment of the teachers, in the sense that they is still centralized. But we cannot say that the complete autonomy is in place, in the sense that we had a strong push in the beginning, but then we didn't have enough continuity in this process of the autonomy. Anyhow, the reaction of the different schools during the pandemic was different because of the autonomy. And in this sense, we can really see the differences between a school with a high level of capacity in management of the timing of the processes, of also the capacity in getting extra funding. And this was one of the point of difference between a school in one side and the other one. For the future, we hope that this process in terms of autonomy could be completed, but still remain the major problem related to the teacher selection. This is again under the design by the government, but I don't have the idea if some kind of a new law could be put in place in a short time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go again to autonomy, but before I would like to ask you one thing that some people have been asking me. It's like, during this crisis, one thing we have observed, or that we have rediscovered once again, is the importance of parents as the educators. You know, like the education of many children have happened thanks to the role of parents. And also we have realized, like, most of the challenges that children are facing are not exclusively their challenge, but also the challenges of their family, like poor families or poor kids or children without access to technology are also children who are parts of families who don't have access to technology or that don't have enough resources. So what we have seen is, like, we are, and that's not something we are discovering, like parents are responsible, as the Covenant on the Rights of the Children say, of the upbringing of the children. And in this kind of crisis, we realize that this is not just wording; it's like it's a fact. Like when the system cannot react to everything, the ones who are there are parents, but sometimes parents tell like this was not accompanied by rights, or it was not hand in hand with them being heard. I think like many people here would be interested on how this how this equation parents, states, and schools has worked in order to make the right to education happen. And if you also can identify some good practices or some trends that would be interesting to explore in order to face this crisis or these sort of challenges in the future. Mrs. Kelly.
I think probably the most striking lesson for schools has been that all schools now understand that there is a huge appetite from parents to know more about their children's education. And some schools were already very good at doing this, other schools much less good at this, but parents really want to know, they want to be involved in their children's education, and they want to contribute and help the children as far as they can. And not every parent is in that position, but those who are available to help really, really want to do so. I don't think that the views of parents and the needs of parents have been systematically addressed in this crisis. I think there just hasn't really been time to do that. So one of the things I'd say is that it's really important for parents' views to be taken into account when planning for any future crises, so that schools, the government, and the community understand what sort of support would really help parents. One thing that was very interesting in the UK crisis, and I'd be interested in knowing whether it happened in other countries as well, in the first lockdown, was that the community really stood up and tried to help. So for example, we had a very, very popular fitness coach called Joe Wicks in the first lockdown, who every day at 9 o'clock did an hour's PE lesson. And right across, and it was on Main Street, it was on his YouTube channel. And right across the United Kingdom, parents alongside children were doing an hour of PE in the morning. And it was all free from him for the nation. And then other people came in and delivered high profile lectures in their areas of expertise, which were broadcast and ultimately put together by the BBC for every age group to get the best of the best, as it were, teaching the nation. So not quite to do with parents, but I think it shows you that parents are able to take advantage of resources, or lots of them are able to take advantage of resources if they are, supported in helping their children. And I think that is something that could really be encouraged for the future.
Mrs. Seabra.
Okay, let me see.
We can hear.
I think that, in fact, a lot we did also see a lot of generosity, and as you said, and as I said previously, Portuguese children reported that they were, in fact, strongly helped by their parents. So Portuguese parents showed that availability and interest in being involved in children's education, and that is a very positive consequence of this, of course. The thing that Portuguese children claimed more about was their biggest problem with long distance learning. So they said 70% of them said that was that they did not have a quiet place to study at home, meaning that houses were too crowded, and the parents were working at home, and so they did not find a quiet place to study. So eventually schools could look at that, like making available rooms for small groups with tutors helping them. So even in periods of lockdown, having some intermediate solutions for children lacking well, basic conditions at home. Of course, this is dangerous because eventually you would have all the parents wanting to send their children to school, which is impossible. So schools should have to play a role here, but eventually there could be some mechanisms halfway between fully attending schools and remaining at home that could be also of help in this situation. And of course, helping parents with the contents, that idea of having specialists teaching for parents the materials. I think this is a very interesting idea. Of course, schedules, parents were also working at home, most of them. So, but that is a very interesting idea, and I think that many parents would of course much appreciate that type of contribution, I believe.
Thank you so much. Mr. Profumo.
Yeah, during the pandemic, I think that one of the most concern was related to the fact that school is not only education, but is really a social issue, in the sense that for parents, it was very clear that the possibility for the students to go or not to go to school was one social problem. In the meantime, we had in some part of Italy some kind of community of students and parents that they could follow, for example, the distance learning together in a group. And this was quite good in the sense that the students, as we know, for them is very important to have other children to be together. And this is where was a good system in the sense that, for example, 2 or 3 students, they could move from one home to the other one, and they could follow a part of the lectures by long distance education, but in the meantime, they could also make a project together, and they could in some way to have something similar to what they have to school. Then from this point of view, in some cases, was a good injection of energy inside the system. And I have the feeling that at the end of this tragedy that we are living now, the school, they have learned that they could teach not only in the room of the school, but also outside of the school. And they could have an hybrid system in sense, some part of the school in presence and some other, for example, in a different place. And also they could use as a material, much more material that they come from different sources. And in some way, the students, they have the possibility to grow up in a different way that is not well stabilized for now, but maybe for the future could be interesting. For example, we know that it's necessary for the future to understand that most of the knowledge is on the net, on the web, but most of the students, they don't know how to use it. And you know, the knowledge is becoming more and more one commodity. And from this point of view, it's changing really the way to do school. And then at least I understand that we have a lot of trouble with during this time, but also we had some good experimentation from this point of view. And I have the feeling that at the end of this process, the school will be different. We cannot go back 100% to what we had before. And maybe if we could rationalize in the sense that we can select the best experimentation that we had during this time, we could, some of this could be transferred to the school. And in some way, we can speed up the transformation of the school, starting from this period so difficult for the school itself.
Thank you so much. I have a question, and I ask this question bearing in mind that we have some officials of UNESCO, and I think you can help them to reflect on the reality you've been talking. So one idea I kept of all your commentaries, like with this crisis, we realized that education is a common enterprise. It's a common good, it's a common endeavor, and that we have somehow to overcome this idea of rivalry, of competition between public and private, or parents and teachers. No, like we are all together on that. We have to overcome the idea that parents can be a burden, and starting to see them as allies and starting to trust citizens. No, and instead of thinking like how we can make education more run by government, we have to think like how can we enable room in order to make education what it is, no, common endeavor, with a public perspective maybe, but at the end like a common endeavor, which all actors should be here. I think it would be really interesting if you, bearing in mind your experience as ministers, if you could share concrete examples that could help, I think, that could help officials of UNESCO and also some policymakers of how education as a common good can be realized, especially bearing in mind this context in which we have seen that different actors. No, we were mentioning this example from the UK, who was offering free exercise, or other example from Portugal. But I would like to, if you could deepen this topic, no, concrete examples that policymakers could bear in mind to realize education as a common good.
Okay. Okay, Ignasi, shall I start? So I think that's a really, really good question. One of the things that became apparent in the whole crisis is how much everybody cared about trying to allow people to be educated, or, you know, give as proper and appropriate as an education as possible to as many children as possible. And hence the community coming together. I mean, that was a really, really big impact on the national morale, actually. But another example, perhaps, of good collaboration is lots of private schools help local state schools. And it is now becoming more expected that they do, that they share sports facilities, that they share other specialist teaching, perhaps in Latin or Greek, or in areas where you wouldn't necessarily expect the provision to be available in a state school, and allow people to come and learn in their premises. Now, obviously, that's not going to have happened so much during the coronavirus pandemic, but the use of resources and technical resources for state school provision might well be happening, and it would be an interesting thing to track. Because some of those collaborations, which and schools are very autonomous in the United Kingdom, so it's not obvious what has happened and what hasn't happened. But it would be very interesting to ask about those sorts of collaborations and to see whether technological solutions have been shared over the past year as well.
Maria do Carmo.
Yes, I think that there are other collaborations between schools and between schools. No, between schools and other institutions, facilities like municipal facilities and sports and many other facilities that could be helpful to involve the whole community in these efforts. But I do not have much to say. I do not. I want to listen to Francesco. Eventually, he has better ideas than me.
Perfect. Mr. Profumo, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this idea of education as a common good.
In Torino, in the last few years, we launched a very strong program that we call Riconnessioni. And we have more than 300 schools. And first of all, we did a great investment in terms of connectivity, and then a good investment in terms of requalification for teachers, and also in production of materials, educational materials. But what was the most important was that we create a reduced number of network of schools, in the sense that we started a real collaboration between the different schools in different parts of the city, in a different with a different level of quality in the beginning. And the results are, just to give you some numbers, around 300 schools in the Torino area with 100,000 students and 11,000 teachers. Then is a quite large program. And the results was that having this school working together and exchanging also teachers on one side and the materials on the other side, we try to equalize to improve the quality of the system. Then was a good way to really have the school as a common good. And you know, in the past we had this kind of a network, but it was more among the student schools in the same area or with the same quality. What we did in this case was something completely different. We tried to have like a mixture of schools, and the result is quite good. Then we did, it's a 4 years program, and the results, the final results, in our case, is quite good. This is, I think, is a good way to also, and during the pandemic, this network of schools, they still be in place in the sense that they had some kind of collaboration, not only in the normal time, but also in the pandemic time.
Another idea, Ignasi, that we've seen a little bit in the pandemic in the United Kingdom is more and more people taking on responsibilities as mentors for school children. And it's a way really of bringing, again, people together for the benefit of the community and for young people's learning. And I think it can provide an enormous amount of help for families who are low in social capital, who don't have very many networks themselves, where the children don't necessarily have high aspirations, to have adults outside the family very interested in their learning and their progress. And that's something that can be fairly easily done. And I think you'll find a lot of people, professional people, who are prepared to contribute and help those in more difficult situations.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. That's, I mean, I'm have to say, I'm loving this conversation more than what I was expecting to be a really interesting, but this experience you are sharing are really, really interesting, even for me, that I try to be updated, but it's really constructive. I have a concrete question that two people from the audience have made. So far, we've been following kind of a coherence between the questions, but I'm gonna jam in different things. Like people from the audience are asking me one thing that you already mentioned before. It's about mental health. There has been an increasing mental health as a problem has been an increasing issue during this crisis, but eventually some people even say that this could be a growing problem in the future years due to the fact that we are in a rapidly changing world, and it can cause anxiety among children. Have you identified this as a trend in your countries? Apparently you have, because you already mentioned some of you. And also, are there any experiences or any are there any experience that have worked that you want to share with the audience that can help to reflect on this topic on mental health, on children and education?
Okay, so I'll come in there and let anyone else come in who wants to speak. But I think this will be a turning point for mental health and for the understanding of the extreme needs of some of our children and young people and teenagers and their mental health needs, partly because they've deteriorated, but they were already pretty bad. In Britain, in the United Kingdom, education policy seems to go in waves. So in some decades, the whole well-being and mental health of children is at the top of the policy agenda. In the next decade, it's all about standards and exam results, and then it comes around again to look at the whole need of the child. I think we're now definitely going to be at a turning point, because everybody recognizes that the mental health issues are really, really profound among young people. How do you deal with that when the government has put some resources into schools to tackle mental health? So to have counsellors based in the school who can work with the most vulnerable children, but clearly that's a drop in the ocean as compared to what is required. Secondly, I think there's a recognition that actually what children have lost is not just education, it's all the social mixing, as Francesco was saying. It's, it's just interacting with other children and being able to do creative things together and work together as teams that they've really missed out on. So a lot of the debate here in Britain is about summer schools, as I think Carmo has said, enrichment activities, allowing children to discover different sides of themselves together with other children, and perhaps over the summer holidays, to really see how, they can rediscover themselves and hopefully go some way to tackling mental health issues that way. But I think this is going to be a long-term issue that we're going to have to tackle as different nations.
Carmo, is it a growing problem in increasing? Is it a problem also in Portugal? And are you perceiving any?
I believe so, and in fact, not in low education. I don't have data concerning these impacts on in these levels of education, but in my faculty, we have carried out a survey with those problems, and we verify that even at university level, so people endowed already with more strength to face this isolation period, I think. Even then, we had around 30% of our students reported very strong mental problems, so that we opened the university the moment we were allowed to, in spite of long distance teaching and learning at university level being much easier than, of course, at these levels of education. So we opened very quickly because of that problem. And of course, if it exists at the university level, it must only be stronger at these lower levels of education. And we have, like Ruth said, in the United Kingdom, we have had some help and counseling in schools for a long time, but this is always a drop in the ocean. So very, very few resources given the level of needs. So I think we should reinforce that. And let me only say one more thing concerning those summer schools. Summer schools will be, if organized, and they are going to be in several countries, as I said, if they are organized, in fact, they are very expensive. Because teachers have to be paid and prepared. So they require at least a 45 hours preparation, so it seems, or something like that. And then they have to be paid the whole month. But our estimates, Portuguese estimates suggest that the rate of return of the investment in those summer schools is huge, like 4 to 9 euros per euro invested. So it's an enormous rate of return. Of course, along the lifetime, if we compute the gains over the lifetime of children. So I think that we should put a great effort in these summer schools, because I believe that this is something that is possible. We have the resources. This can be done, this can be implemented quite easily for this next summer. We do not need to be preparing more psychiatrists and so forth. So this is not a long-term. I'm not saying that long-term responses are not required. Of course they are, but these short-term responses, I believe, could help a lot and could be highly beneficial to the system, I believe.
Mr. Profumo.
Yeah, for the summer school, we have a quite long experience on that, but during the normal time, the summer school is mainly for sport and for leisure for the students. In the sense, was a way to help the parents that they still have to go to work and they don't have time to follow the kids. But last year and this year, we changed almost completely the model of the summer school. And this year, we will have also a good investment by the government. In the past, it was mainly one investment by the cities, and there was not homogeneous in Italy. For this summer, we expect to have, in addition to sport and leisure, also one important educational part of the summer school, in order to recover part of what was lost during the last 14 or 16 months, and also to build up a bridge with the new academic year that will start in September. Then and I have the feeling that could be a good occasion just to try to design also for the future one type of summer school that could be useful in a system that sometimes is too rigid and is not able to follow with what they need, the students or some kind of students. Then I have the feeling that this could be good. From the mental health in Italy, like in UK and in Portugal, we have problems in the schools, and these problems, they've been increased by the crisis, because the students, they have some unusual way to work. And this is something that is more evident than what was in the past. Also in Italy, the investment in mental health is very little. And I have the feeling that in the next, when the new normality will begin, we need to invest more from this point of view, because it's becoming a problem for the country. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question, like some people, I'm going to put them together. The question is about, like, one thing we realized during this crisis is like education is way more than just providing knowledge. No, it's not just, it's way more than mathematics, language, science. Many of you have mentioned it already, that education. It's the lack of education also has an impact of the well-being of the children. Also, we have mentioned the importance of exercise. Also, we have mentioned educational institutions as a place where people meet, they mingle, they have their social interactions where they learn who they are. Also, the educational process as a place where they learn where are they coming from, who they are, which is the community around them. So one of the challenges of this year has been that this holistic experience that education should be, according to international institutions, it says education as the free development of personality. We realize that education is way more than just education. So, and even one thing also we realize school facilities many times is the places where children in places of social exclusion are receiving their meals, and where it's a place where they are receiving many of the help or the social security they require. I would like to hear from you, like bearing in mind this common good perspective that we have been mentioning, if you could think of other good practices good practices of your own country that focuses on children in situation of social exclusion, good practices that has happened during this crisis and can inspire future legislation.
One example, and I think Carmo touched on this as well before, that the United Kingdom has introduced fairly successfully is the National Tutoring Programme. And I think this shows the opportunity to bring in actors who aren't necessarily already part of the school system. So the UK government has validated a host of private tutoring agencies and their tutors, and arrange discounted rates, very discounted rates, so that schools can use these as they wish for one-to-one lessons or small group lessons for children who are falling behind in specific subjects. And I think it's a really interesting way of bringing in, stakeholders outside the school system to help. Another, and this isn't part of our current practice, but another possible suggestion would be to give parents something like an educational voucher to say, what does your child need? Is it extra help in maths, or is it, access to a music group? And allow parents to have some choice as to how they use the catch-up funding. But that's not something I think that is being considered at the moment, but it would be a natural extension to try and get parents involved in the choice of the support that's available for their children.
Thank you, really interesting. Carmo.
Well, the most relevant experience I know is the one Ruth said about the United Kingdom. In fact, one of the co-authors of that study I've been mentioning is a Portuguese man, but he's the head of one of those institutions. He works in London. He's heading one of those institutions, a private institution that is working with the public schools to help to tutor low income and low background students in general and so forth. So this is an extremely interesting experiment. I'm not aware of things like that working on in Portugal. Of course, there are some partial solutions. There are some groups that provide centers to help these poor people with that, but those are very partial experiments. I think that that experiment in the United Kingdom is in fact is the one I was remembering. In Portugal, probably Rodrigo knows more than me about that type of situations and could give you better examples than me. I don't know.
Still, Mr. Profumo, like, I don't know if you want to share any, or even like if you have a vibe on things that could be done according to your experience for these children in social exclusion.
Yeah, in Torino, we have since more than 20 years one special program that we call Provaci Ancora Sam, Try Again Sam, that is funded by the Compagnia di San Paolo, and is a program for students and for kids that they are in a poor situation, and the poverty is not only economical, but it's something more. And with this program, we have not only teachers, but we have also people coming from the third sectors. And what they do is, in addition to the school hours, they do a special program in order to help the students in what they have as difficulties. And this program is a quite a good program in the sense that after 20 years, we have a good results in terms of possibility for these students to really improve during these additional activities that they do, not during the school hours, but after school hours. Then this is one way really to help students with the difficulties, and we are thinking also to enlarge this program to other parts of the city in Torino, and maybe to use the same model also in other parts of Italy.
Really interesting. We have 10 minutes to go, so I'm gonna go with the final questions, or maybe the final question that has been asked me through different channels. One thing we have experienced during this crisis, it has been the increasing of homeschooling.
Sorry?
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, I was saying, like, there are we're in the last 10 minutes, so I'm just gonna go with the last questions, if not the last question. So some people are asking me through different challenges that one thing that we have experienced during this year, it's been the increasing of parents choosing homeschooling, not as a consequence of the closure of the schools, but also as a long-term decision. I would like to know how your countries are dealing with this increasing reality of parents that rather educate their children at home, alone or with other families.
Okay, well, in the United Kingdom, there's a right to homeschool your children. I don't know if that's the same everywhere. So there have always been some families that educate their children themselves, and they have to be able to show that they are providing a full curriculum, or not a full curriculum, but a decent curriculum. What has happened, and this was happening well before the pandemic, is that there's been a really steep rise in the number of children who are lost to the system. And it's not clear whether they're being home educated or not home educated. And there's now a big increase in demands for all providers of education to be registered and inspected. So while the expectation was there wasn't a requirement for a registration before now. But this has been one of the responses to the current situation.
Okay, in Portugal, this is also a legal possibility, but it is totally residual. Very, very, very few families ask for that. And so this is really uncommon in Portugal, and I do not know of any trend on the direction of increasing that during this pandemic situation.
Okay, it's interesting to know also that maybe maybe this trend is focused on some concrete countries, but this is not a worldwide. I mean, it doesn't have to be a thing that is happening country by country. Mr. Profumo, I don't know what is the situation in Italy?
It's the same as in Portugal. We have some, but very little. Yeah, not there is not really a movement for parents. Not yet for now.
The big issue in the United Kingdom is schools not wanting to have very difficult pupils on their school register, and being quite happy to see or to have a conversation with parents to say, you know, maybe they'd be better off being home educated. That has become an issue because of the real strength of accountability in the school system on exam results. And if you've got a child who's not showing up, who's not doing very well, etc., this school's no longer right for your child becomes the possibility. The conversation becomes a possibility, and in unscrupulous schools, there tends to be an acceptance, if not positive encouragement, to take them off the school roll.
I see. I think we are, I mean, first of all, thank you to all the speakers. I don't know if you wanted to say something more before I finish with that. Feel free to stop me, the three speakers, but I want to thank the three of you. I think, at least for me, it's been a wonderful discussion. It's been really enriching, and I hope the rest of the people that have participated on that, I think they have been learning a lot, and it was good to have this exchange. Some people who have struggled to arrive on time, they were asking me if we could do a wrap up. Don't worry. It's either OIDEL or either Ignasi or either OIEC that are the sponsors. We are going to share the video with them, so we will be able to rewatch whatever you want, or if you have a right play, you will be able to watch that from the beginning. Thank you to all of you for being here, and we hope we will be able to do more events like that. And honestly, once again, like, thank you to the three speakers. It's been a wonderful discussion.